Okay, hey, welcome everyone tonight to our financial seminar that we're hosting with Hope Midtown and Hope Chelsea. And it's actually going to be led by some friends of ours who were on staff with us. Well, David Shim was a pastor on our staff at Hope Midtown for a couple of years, maybe. I don't quite remember, but
Yeah.
and Lisa was also part of our leadership, and they both were such an incredible kind of gift to us. And Lisa, I believe she works in finance right now. David
I
was
do.
also
Yeah.
someone who is leading our environments, a lot of our group leaders, as well as kind of discipleship processes. And he's also someone who helped kind of maintain and teach Financial Peace University, which was a great course that we're looking to offer as well. And so I'm delighted to be able to introduce them, and they're going to be leading our time tonight. And we will have questions and answers. I believe the chat function should be open for you to go ahead and use. So if you have any questions throughout, you can drop your question in the chat. And and then Lisa and David will, of course, be introducing kind of different elements where they'll also kind of invite different questions that you might have. So yeah, so why don't you guys go ahead and take it away?
Awesome. Thanks, Drew. And it's so good to see all of you guys, faces of old friends and hopefully some new ones after this. I thank you for joining us on a Friday evening. I know this is like the most exciting thing that you wanted to do on a Friday night. I'm going to share screens in a little bit and actually bring up a presentation that I want to walk through. And just for background, I was, can you guys all see my screen? Thank you for nodding. All right. Just as background, I've been in the financial services industry for almost 15 years, which is incredible to think. My first job was as it was a teller of sorts at my university, and I never would have imagined that I would be sitting in a position within a bank 15, 16 years later. So financial or personal finance rather is a bit of a passion of mine. So I wanted to just share some tips and lessons that I've learned along the way, and I've learned them, as recent as, a couple of years ago, and actually even a couple of months ago. And David and I will share a little bit about some of the things that we're learning even through this interesting time through this public health crisis. So with that, I first want to open up in prayer, and then we'll get started. So Lord, we just thank you for this evening and for just allowing us to talk about this topic that may not be the most comfortable topic at times, but we just pray for your peace, and we pray for your just your spirit to come and open our minds and our hearts to understand what it means to be stewards of our finances. We just give this time to you in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, so let's get right to it. And David and I will be, kind of going back and forth a little bit. But I wanted to start off with this quote from Dr. Ron Walburn. And actually, David, if you wouldn't mind reading it, then we can get started.
Yeah, this is actually a quote from Dr. Ron Walburn, who is a dean of Alliance Theological Seminary. And he wrote, "Unfortunately, this concept of stewardship may be more palatable when it remains a mere theological principle than when it becomes a call to practical Christian living. It's not difficult to accept Christian stewardship in the abstract, but we are slow to embrace it when it impinges upon tangible reality." He actually said it when he's actually teaching, and giving us seminars on the Christian stewardship, that we actually tend to bifurcate it and put it in a more theological sense in one box, while putting the practical and more living practice on the other. And this separation or this compartmentalization of the stewardship tends to happen a lot when it comes to finance or anything practical that we have to live out.
Yeah. And I think of this time as a very interesting time. Obviously we can look at a lot of the devastating facts that are out there in the media around COVID and how it impacts our communities. But I also think that this is a time where, real, behaviors and like acts of human kindness and also like human behavior towards finances come along. And so it's interesting because, it's usually when things are hard where your true motives and your true behaviors come out. And so just to give you a context of some of the tangible reality that we're living in, it's pretty stark, I won't lie. The current unemployment rate stands today at 14.7%. Jobless claims across the country, 36 million. Consumer debt, 14.3 trillion. These are pretty harsh ratios, and I'm not trying to make this a Debbie Downer type of session at all, but I also do want to level set here that we are living in a time that's pretty unprecedented. And I know that sounds cliche. I also work in marketing, and it's the most cliche phrase, but it's cliche for a reason because it's true. And the statistic that gets me really bothered is the following. So about a year and a half ago, the Federal Reserve did a survey on individuals and their personal finance and savings. And they posed this question in the survey: how many people would comfortably be able to cover an unexpected $400 expense? And unfortunately, the number is 61%, which, it's over 50. It's a larger than majority number, but that also means that 39% can't cover that. And I think it shows and it reveals the behavior of, our society in this country of just not being in a place that we can be at net saving. And so really the purpose of today is to share some principles that are practical, but that are also grounded in some in biblical foundation as well. So also I wanted to just table set the session. It's interesting because I was taking notes from some of the other personal finance seminars and sessions that I've given in the past at Hope and at other forums as well. And, while the material is in large part unchanged, the times that we're living in is a little different. So I do want to level set and be sensitive to the fact that this isn't a time that, we went from a time 2 months ago where we were like at the economic highs, and 2 months later it's like a completely different story. And so I know that there are some of you here today who, whether it's you personally or of folks and are impacted by friends and family members who have either been furloughed or severely impacted by the pandemic. And also maybe you haven't been, there's some people who have had no financial impact, but yet your day-to-day is not the same as it was 2 months ago. Right now, I would say when it comes to finances, the most important thing, the most important priority right now is for us to make sure that basic needs are met. And this is not just basic needs for ourselves, but thinking about family, friends, and neighbors. And that it's a time where if you or somebody who needs that help to raise your hand and be vulnerable, because there are, and I know Drew has mentioned this as well, we do it here in Florida at our church, where we have set mercy funds for this particular purpose to be able to be generous in a time where, people really need it. So just wanted to level set that before we start the program. Also, please feel free to chat or to ask any questions along the way. David's going to monitor all of that as well. So he will interrupt me if there are any questions around the topics that we're talking about. Okay, so the first topic that we're going to talk about is debt. Now, I think most of you are familiar with debt. It comes in a lot of forms today in society, whether it's student loan debt, car debt, which I know a lot of people in the city it's not as relevant for, and mortgage debt. And I just wanted to level set by sharing, the Webster definition of what debt really is. So debt is borrowing money with an obligation, most oftentimes a legal one, and to pay it back at a future date with interest. So It's not a grant. It's something that basically, as the Bible says, enslaves you to the lender. And the Bible in Proverbs 22:7 talks about the rich and how they rule over the poor. The borrower is a slave of the lender, which I think in modern times feels like pretty harsh. But I can tell you, growing up in an immigrant family where we were highly leveraged, my parents, were highly leveraged in their house, and very cash poor. I can see that it's an emotional ensnarement at times when you are in a position of being highly in debt. So, I think in terms of the picture of debt and our views on it, what financial peace teaches, what David and I teach, and what we practice is the elimination of debt and not being in a place where we are in debt. I wanted to give you this example. That's a live example. It's an actual example of a credit card statement that I had received. This is probably a couple of years ago, old now, but I was shocked. I don't know about you, but I rarely look at my statements. And for some reason that day, I wanted to take a look at the statements and including all the print, from top to bottom. And I was a little stunned by some of the information that was listed on there because it's a little harrowing. So the balance for that credit card statement was $1,600. And then right underneath it, the next line was that the minimum balance due on that $1,600 bill was only $35. So basically the intent is that, hey, if you can't pay that in full, at least pay this amount, which is, a fraction of the total. And then underneath that, there was something called APR, annual percentage rate, or annualized percentage rate of 29.99%. So that's a 30% interest rate, which is insane. It's an insane amount of interest that you're paying on a relatively lower balance. And then when you look right underneath that, there was this little text box, and it had the following information. And it said, if you make no additional charges, and each month, so this is like if you stop using your credit card and you're paying down the $1,600 and you only make that minimum balance or minimum payment, you can pay that off in 6 years. Like that's like 72 months of paying this over and over again. And at the end of it, you'd actually, instead of paying that $1,600, you'd be paying $2,730, or almost double, so $1,130 more than if you had just paid that balance in full. And then just to make sure that, you don't get the worst scenario, they give you a slightly better scenario of, okay, maybe not 35, but if you pay $59, you can chop that payment schedule in half, but you're still paying at the end for that $1,600 bill. And again, no more payments on that credit card, a total of $2,110. And so I guess the moral of the story here is, the credit card business is actually a very lucrative and thriving one. And it's because of situations like these. And, and I hope I'm not offending anybody if they work for a credit card company here, but it's not a position as a person borrowing to be in for a very long period of time. You want to have that habit of practicing paying that off in full. And so I just wanted, this is a very stark example, but I think ultimately what we're trying to show here is that, paying this off in full, not carrying that interest is the best practice for financial peace. So how do we get rid of debt? Many of us come with debt at a pretty young age. I carried debt immediately as a freshman in college. And so I had student loan debts to pay like immediately after I started graduating. And I remember thinking that deferments were amazing, and not at the time understanding that the interest was accruing on top of that. So I just wanted to share with you some principles about how to get rid of debt. And, again, this is not to pose any sense of guilt or judgment or even a burden. It's just, trying to get us into a good practice of understanding how to get and steps to get out of debt. So I'm just taking a sample schedule here of various types of loans that somebody could take out. That credit card example is here on the top, and then followed by a car loan, which again, I know is probably not in most of your portfolio today, student loans, and for some of you, a mortgage. So when you look at this, and on the far right, you'll see minimum monthly payments. The idea is like, at least, let's just say you're in a position where you're like, look, this is the debt schedule that I have. The best advice that I would give is you have to at least pay your minimum monthly balance. Anything less than that would get you into a pretty bad position, even with the credit bureau. But the ideal situation is to get to a place where you're getting to a much more towards paying down all of it. But if you can't, the first step is to pay off at least just the minimum. And then as you're paying down the debt, allocate that same amount. So let's just say instead of paying it off in 72-month installments, you decide to pay the credit card off in two, right? So you have $800 and you pay that off in 2 months plus the interest. And then that $800 no longer is going to be used towards that credit card. So pay it back down to the next big debt. And instead of doing it by balance, what I like to say is to do it by interest rate, right? So the intuitive one would be to maybe put it towards the mortgage, but what I would say is that 7% is a much bigger number, and to attack that student loan, and to attack that down to a place where it can become zero and zeroed out, and then move to the next one. And so you just keep what we call the snowball effect of taking that same amount of money that you're going to use to attack your debt, and just keep doing that until it becomes zero. Does anyone have any questions around that? I don't know if there's any. Pretty straightforward. All right. So just some tips on paying off debt.
Sorry to interrupt.
Yes, hi, Deanna.
Yeah. I just want to clarify what you just said. You go after the one that has the highest interest rate, or the one that has the highest dollar balance?
Interest rate.
Okay, because you were talking about 7%, whereas in this example, the highest interest rate was 30%.
No.
Yeah.
The smallest balance.
Yes.
So how do you determine which one you should get rid of, work on first?
Interest rate.
Yeah. So the first one that I was talking about to get attack is that credit card. That 30% interest rate is just egregious. Yeah. You want to be paying that down first.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Good question. Okay. So just some tips around paying off debt. And Drew, I can send this presentation over so that people in this call can actually have a copy of this. So I don't have to read it word for word, but this basically lays out what methodology I was talking about in the slide before. And then just a note, during COVID, again, this is a very unique season, and a lot of lenders these days are making some borrower-friendly decisions. They're allowing students to defer their payments, and they're actually not accruing interest in some cases. And this is also a good time to call those, whether it's a borrower or even things that you're having to spend money on a monthly basis. I know that David and I, again, this is a car, so it's not as relevant, but even our car insurance, because they realize that we're not driving as much, we're basically not going to be as accident prone, they reduced our car insurance. So things like that, where you can go back to certain vendors and actually ask them to negotiate their price down. This is the time to do that. And I think a lot of lenders and companies are more gracious during this period. Also, alternatively, if you are in a position where you do have student loan debt, and you are able to pay it, you can now put a nice dent on the principal of that loan because they're not accruing interest at this point. So it's a good time to work on saving or to taking down that debt. And especially because I think, and I'm hoping that most of you are in this position, we've been in this quarantine environment where we're not able to enjoy the luxuries of New York City, whether it's, going to a nice movie or musical or enjoying a nice restaurant. And so we're kind of in this forced savings position. And so I think it's a really good time to look at your finances, and if you are able to pay off some of the debt that you're carrying. Okay. So moving on to the next topic, budgeting, my favorite. David knows this is my favorite. So now I'm going to ask for a little bit of interaction with the group here. And we're going to do a little bit of annotating. So if you wouldn't mind, if you guys are able to, especially if you're on a computer, there's a little button on your Zoom that has a toolbar that has an annotate button. And if you guys can annotate, and what I'd like to see is, where in these 4 quadrants are you? And the quadrants are, on the top left, you don't care about budgeting, you don't even know what a budget is, and you don't manage, or if you manage finances in your household, but not really sure how to do that, versus on the right side where you budget every day or every month, and you manage your finances. So for me, if I were to annotate, and what you do is if you do an annotate and a stamp, and I'll choose a little heart stamp. So I love to budget, but David and I actually share the managing of finances in our household. So where do people lie? If you guys can help to participate in this.
Oh, sorry. Where do you find that?
I don't even know how to do this.
No worries.
Is it called reaction, you mean?
Annotate.
Oh.
Annotate. Yeah.
I don't see that.
I don't see it either. Where do you see it?
It's on if you look at the settings, or if you want to, there's a toolbar that has like mute, stop video.
Yes.
All of that. There should be a setting that says annotate.
No.
You see that? No.
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 Reactions, record, share, chat, participate, stop video, and mute.
Oh,
I
good.
think for people who are viewing your
reaction?
screen, at the top, there says things like you're viewing Lisa's screen, and then next to it is a drop-down called View Options.
It's in
in
the drop down. Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Oh, in view options. Okay.
It's in the drop down at the top of the screen.
So most of you love to budget.
Okay. Annotate,
So happy.
And then how do you pick something to click on to indicate it?
You click on stamp. Do you see the stamp?
Stamp. Oh, there it is.
Yep.
But how do I get it to go into the right quadrant?
Then you just hover your mouse and pick a quadrant and click.
Oh, okay.
Just a quick FYI, it can be done from the phone as well.
Awesome. Thank you, Helen.
All right. It's not working for me, but I clicked on. Here. Oh, here it is.
You got it?
I think so. Let's see. All right. So I just go here. No, it's not giving it.
No worries. Deanna, do you want to share which quadrant you would have stamped your?
Manage finances and household. Yes, that's me.
Awesome. So it sounds like most of you are in the top right, which is great. And so I would love to hear some of your feedback based on what we're about to share, because this, I will tell you personally, as a person who budgeted even before marriage, when I was dating David and we were talking about our finances, a lot of the principles that we are living by today, I wasn't living by before I met him. So it would be very interesting to hear from the group, if this is a paradigm shift for some of you. So this is awesome. All right, here we go. Oops. Give me a sec. All right, so when we think about budgeting, this is a pretty popular verse that comes to mind, that talks about a person, thinking about a project and building it, and what, needing to understand all that is. Oh, you guys are still annotating. Sorry, it's distracting. And I just thought it was relevant for this topic. So the verse reads, "For which of you, desiring to build a tower, does not first sit down and count the cost, whether he has enough to complete it? Otherwise, when he has laid a foundation and is not able to finish, all who can see it begin to mock him, saying, 'This man began to build and was not able to finish.'" And that comes from Luke 14:28 through 30. So when I think about budgeting, the first thing I think about is that it's a discipline. It's like exercise. Some of you are awesome at exercising, but may need some help in budgeting, or you might be awesome in budgeting and may need help in exercising. And I fall in that camp. But it is a discipline. It's not something that you can do once and then just walk away from. You have to constantly be monitoring it. Budgeting is also a position of control. And what I mean by that is, money, while, a lot of people say is just a tool and, it's a neutral thing, it also does have power to it, or can have the ability to take control. And budgeting really helps the driver's seat become the person versus the dollars. And so, part of this discipline is actually managing and taking control of your money. And it's also, meant to provide a way towards financial freedom. A lot of times people might think, oh, it's a chore, or I'm scared of it, or it's not for me, I don't need to worry about it. But it's almost a false sense of freedom, because at the end of the day, if you don't know what you're doing, you could be squandering, you could be, making things a lot better and giving away more than what you thought you could have. And so it's just a matter, budgeting provides that framework that can actually lead you to financial freedom. Okay. All right, so how to budget. So most of you, put on the top right quadrant. So I will go through this pretty quickly. For David and I, our budgeting habit is we do this once a month. Once a month, the two of us sit together and we go through it. But how it started was first understanding what we did historically. Now, again, these past 2.5 to 3 months have been very different. Obviously, your spending habits, your saving and your giving habits have been very different from, I'm assuming, from the past. But I think there's some good behaviors there as well that you should be thinking about once we come out of this quarantine season, and maybe thinking about new ways of allocating your dollars. You also want to make sure you're categorizing your spending. So if you're finding that, for us, food is a big component of our budget, but when we really looked into it, it wasn't just food, it was eating out. And I'm sure, for those of you who live in the city, eating out was, it was a considerable amount of our budget. And it still is today. But it's good to know, how much of it is groceries versus eating out, and understanding, are you comfortable with those levels? The other thing is you want to also understand how much after-tax income you are receiving on a monthly basis in order to allocate into those categories that we'll talk about. And we'll make a plan. Now, this plan that we talk about, and this is an FPU, Financial Peace University principle, and actually something that I learned, as I was dating David, and I wanted David to help, kind of explain this methodology. And the methodology is giving, saving, and spending. So the way that we think about it is when you have your after-tax income, how do you think about, allocating and intentionally allocating? And for us, we prioritize our giving first, then our saving, and then our spending. So David, could you help us here? Because this was new for me. Frankly, for me, when I thought about my after-tax income, I did think about tithe, but I didn't really think about giving as a whole. And so, David, can you just give a little bit of insight of why we choose to give first?
So when we're actually talking about financial stewardship and how we actually use our money, we actually set the order of give, save, and spend in that order. And the reason why we actually give first, there's actually two components to it, one theological and one practical. The theological reason being that we actually want to make sure that we put God first in everything. That just like how we always put, God with the highest priority, we wanted to make sure that when we are doing our finances, that we actually put our giving first as a form of worship and also to think God the priority that he deserves. But secondly, also there's a practical component to it. It's because when we actually wait to give after we save and spend, I tend to not give at all. Or that we actually have these expenses that just creep up and then that actually eat away into our giving pile. So to actually circumvent that whole temptation portion, to actually protect ourselves away from it, that we decide to actually give first so that we actually protect their boundaries first and foremost.
Yeah, thank you. Again, I think that was a huge lesson for me when we first started dating, that I was like, wow, there is a freedom in allocating that first. At first, it was a shock, but as we were practicing it, I was like, oh, this is such a blessing. The second allocation then, after we think about how we give, is how we save. And I put saving and investing here together because, there is a principle within FPU of, making sure that you're saving for that emergency. And you might be actually in that emergency today. And that's what it's used for, right? And so the rule of thumb here is to make sure that at first, if you have zero, let's just say you are coming from a place of no savings, that you try to get to a place where you can get to $1,000 for an emergency. And then when you get there, then you build up to 3 to 6 months of living expenses. And again, these are it's savings that you don't use until extenuating circumstances just like this. So this might be the period where you're tapping into savings. The other piece is investing. And investing can come in multiple forms. I won't go into too many. I won't go into like investing strategies or anything, but there are options out there if you're currently employed through your employer with 401ks, or if you're self-employed, there's IRA opportunities. So there's ways to set aside, and investing is really for the future. It's not something that I would necessarily recommend for you to play in, for a day trade, or for, a short-term gain. It's really, you're investing for your future, whether it's for your retirement, whether it's for your next generation. So that's really the mindset when we think about investing. So that's the principle. But David, one of the things that I think he was helpful in helping me with in understanding is like, what is the purpose? Sometimes we have this mindset that like we're saving out of a place of fear. And, that can come from, experiences in the past, because we've definitely gone through recessionary periods before. But, that's not healthy either, right? And so we really have to, I think, introspectively understand like when we save, what is our saving habits and why do we do that? So David, can you shed a little bit more light around this question?
Yeah, so as a Christian and as a part of the financial stewardship, there has to be a reason why we save. Coming in from an immigrant family, I do believe that there is this spirit of poverty that forces us to oversave. because we're worried about the future, or whether because that is the shackle that we are yet to release ourselves from, that we actually give our tithing and give our offering, and then we spend the minimum amount and we just save everything else, which is actually a very unhealthy mentality to have. On the other hand, saving is also very difficult. I mean, if it was very easy, there should not be those apps that forces you to save without you knowing even. So how do we actually balance that? There is that the tension always involved with the savings, but the reason why, as a Christian and as a financial stewardship, the reason why we need to save is to, first of all, to prevent our enemy from putting us in a position where we are indebted, where we are slave to debt. All the emergency fund, that is actually what they're doing is to actually prevent us from actually getting into a situation where we have to take a debt, or whether we actually become indebted to a financial institution or a person. So to actually have that emergency fund, that actually becomes quite important, and to do that intentionally before we spend the money also becomes very important. But secondly, the reason why we invest and why we save is so that we can give away. We enjoy God's blessing, and we should not feel guilty spending, but also, by and large, there are people who actually are blessed beyond what we live off of, beyond the living standard that we have. And that is not for us to hoard, but for us to actually collect and use it to actually bless others. So with that principle in mind, we tend to set the order to first give to God, and then save the right amount, and then invest it to actually keep us in a safe place where we don't have to become under the debt, or we can actually gather this money and then actually bless someone else in the future.
The third category is spend, and this I think we all know how to do. So the challenge that I will leave you with is, if a third party was to look at your bank statement or your credit card statement, what would that person tell you that you prioritize? Again, budgeting, this is budgeting for finances, but you do this with your calendar, right? To see like, okay, what would somebody tell you is the most important thing in your life that you want to spend quality time with? But I would argue that this is the same exercise, but with your finances. And so just, as a takeaway, why don't you, just kind of store that for an exercise, for you guys to contemplate. All right, so let's go into some examples. Again, I recognize that most of you are fluent in budgeting. Give me a second here. There we go. But this is some standard guidelines that are published by FPU, and also actually, other websites that are well known for personal finance usually have a breakdown of expenses in the following general categories. So housing, 30%, and this is a monthly breakdown based on after tax. And so they recommend, the general recommendation, and again, this is recommendation. So if you're like, oh my gosh, I'm 32%, it's not like you're failing. It's just awareness. So housing is typically the biggest expense that a household usually has. And then we put giving and savings in here, and we put 10% marker. Again, this is something that you intentionally designate and allocate towards those efforts. Food. Now, I recognize, again, food is probably not 10% of your budget. It certainly was not 10% of ours. But then, something else would drop, right? Whether it's utilities, transportation, etc. So this is what an average, and we took an average of somebody making the average of a salary in New York City of $60,000. And this is what it looks like. It doesn't look too bad, but it also is like, this is it, right? So rent being 43%. So typically in New York City, we find that rent is a larger majority or a larger component of our monthly expenses. We have our giving and savings. We have our food budget. So you can see here, instead of 10%, it's about 17%. I've seen budgets where it's been north of 20. But then they're walking. They're not using transportation. They're not using Uber. And they have other ways of, they're sharing Netflix accounts. So other ways of making this work. And you may have other categories that you're planning towards. Some categories like loan. Oh my gosh, I spelled loan payments wrong. I apologize. But loan payments, or maybe for a future house or future travel once we're safe to fly on planes, or for a wedding fund. So these are all things that, again, it's not about you having to prescribe to this. It's just, this is a call to make those categories for yourselves and intentionally put your dollar allocation towards that on a monthly basis. What's interesting about this is, when David and I do our monthly sit down, and this was like my aha moment. And as I mentioned earlier in the session, it was an aha moment that happened in March, right before COVID. So this is not even dependent upon the fact that we were entering into this quarantine. And we would do our monthly sit down, and I'd show him, like, this is how much we spent, and this is how much our budget was. And oops, we were high on this, but we were low on this, so we netted out okay. And I remember him being like, month over month, like, this is not okay, because we said that we were going to be here, like, at some level, but we didn't make it at another. And like, we're just kind of reconciling. We're not actually budgeting. And I don't know if it was a mic drop moment for me. And I was like, you're absolutely right. Budgeting happens to allocate your money as you receive it, not after, in hindsight. And so in March, we did exactly that. And we took 3 major buckets of ours, which is food, gas, and like shopping, like whether it's Amazon or outside of groceries. And we were like, okay, we're gonna make this a game, and we're gonna have, this is the amount on March 1st that we are going to start tracking. And we took a Google sheet, so nothing fancy. There's obviously other apps out there, but we literally took a Google sheet, shared that document, and we're like, okay, this is how we're going to manage. And lo and behold, March, we were fine. I mean, granted, we went into halfway into the month in COVID, but we made it work. And it was just that little mindset shift that made this exercise a budgeting exercise versus a reconciliation exercise. So my last note on budget is the following.
Yeah.
And this is my, yeah.
Lisa, I just want to clarify what you're saying about budgeting versus reconciling.
Yes.
Budgeting is an allocation of money as you receive it. Wouldn't you do the budget based on what you expect you to receive?
That's right. Yes, that's what I'm saying.
And the reconciling is after you receive the money, but the whole idea is that your spending on all these different categories stays within the budget. Hopefully.
That's right. So basically what I was doing, Deanna, before my husband gently told me that I was doing this all wrong, was, I was in hindsight saying that, let's just say I had $300 for my food budget, and I would tell him, oh, David, we spent $325. We were off by $25, versus knowing that we had $300 and tracking that progress of that, how that $300 is being spent over the month. So
that you don't go over $300.
That's right.
At least
That's
not
right.
intentionally. Yeah. Trying to be mindful of it. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. I think I get what you're saying.
You can email us later. We can talk.
The budget, you allocate the money before you receive the money in anticipation of receiving that money.
That's right.
Okay, I can see where there's a problem with that, because I had a colleague who anticipated getting a bonus at the end of the quarter, went ahead and made a major expense in the house, and the bonus ended up not being that amount of money, and then here he was with debt.
Yep. Well, yeah. And that is not a, 1 in 300 million case. Unfortunately, a lot of people live like that, where they overextend based on what they think they're going to receive.
Yes.
And
Um,
Lisa, if I can chime in for a second.
Yeah.
Most of the budgeting actually is not actually set on the estimated payments that you will be receiving. It is actually set on actual payment that you have on hand. So that
Okay.
once you actually have a monthly paycheck that you actually receive, you set your budget actually according to that. We actually have in a lot of cases where people are expecting tax returns, people are expecting some sort of bonuses depending on the sales quota. And when circumstances actually don't come in hand, and when that money actually don't come in, that they have already spent that money that they don't have at hand. That is not budgeting. That is actually just wishing, and almost like buying a lottery ticket. Albeit that is a little bit more sure than lottery ticket, but still, we don't spend our future earning. We spend our earning based upon the monthly budget that we have with the cash on hand that you have. So when it's bonuses and other special payments that you actually receive, you have to set aside a separate budget for that, in lieu of that. But most of our budgeting actually is based upon the monthly paycheck that you actually get from your salaries. And if you actually have non-regular payments,
Right.
for your earnings, then
Right.
you actually have to adjust according to that. So any of those special cases, probably we can actually talk offline a little bit
Okay.
more to help you guys.
All right.
Thank you for clarifying that. So here's my dad joke, and for those who know David and myself, this is dad joke approved. So the last point I'll make before we go and wrap it up with stewardship is budgeting is hard. It's hard in the sense of actually having that discipline. Thinking about the analogy to exercise. And so having accountability is super important. So thankfully, I have somebody like David, who is my budget partner. But even when I was single, I had girls who, we shared our budgets. So we didn't share numbers, we shared percentages, and we kept each other accountable. We went on shopping fasts, or we did things to help each other out. And that accountability leads to a lot more, not only just the shared experience, but also the motivation to actually get to a place where we are actively managing our budget. So if you stare at this lovely word budget, it actually has 2 words in it, and it's bud and get. So my last comment on budgeting is to get a bud. I know, it's brilliant. But just to me, it's a reminder about accountability, and I will leave it at that. All right. So finally, back to stewardship. So we opened with, this quote from Dr. Ron Walburn, but I wanted to just level set and back, just to remind people, why the purpose of all of this. I think a lot of us are blessed to be in a position where we have shelter, basic needs, and most of us have jobs. And, it's not, yes, we earned it. Yes, it's our hard work, but ultimately, God has put us in this position, and it's ours to steward. I think good stewardship ultimately starts with us acknowledging that God is the owner. God is the owner of, the clothes that are on our backs, the food that we eat, the dollars that we're blessed with every month. And I think from that posture, we have a very different paradigm shift of how we manage and use our finances. So I will have a final thought, and I'm going to pass it to David and then finally to Drew, but also open it up for questions. This is when I think about my personal finance journey, this verse is probably the biggest anchor. And it has been my anchor from the very beginning, even when it wasn't associated with finances. And it's this discipline of learning to be content in every circumstance. This is obviously spoken by Apostle Paul in Philippians. But this quote is one of the anchors, I think, of my life. And so it reads, "I'm not saying this because I am in need, for I've learned to be content, whatever the circumstances. I know what it is to be in need, and I know what it is to have plenty. I have learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. I can do all this through him who gives me strength." And I just leave that verse as an encouragement to everyone. You know, I think we're definitely living in a circumstance where it's not plentiful, and it's hard. And I think it's in these moments that God, you know, challenges us, and we have to question whether or not we can be content. And if we're not, you know, understanding the roots of that. And when it comes to finance, I think he yearns and he wants us all to be in a place of peace. And so I know that, you know, Financial Peace University is part of the Hope curriculum, and I encourage those who have not done it to enroll. But those are the thoughts that I had today. David, I don't know if you had anything else before we open up for questions.
So Lisa and I have been leading, Financial Peace University, as well as many other biblical financial stewardship seminars and classes. And a lot of times, you know, the question should fall into two categories: is that how do we actually do biblical financial stewardship, more of just mechanics of it. And most of that, you actually can get great help with many resources out there, including Financial Peace University that Barnaby is leading with the Hope Midtown right now. But also a lot of people actually ask why we actually need to be doing a financial stewardship. And once again, it goes back to what Lisa said in slide earlier, that it is all about the mindset, that the moment that we recognize that we are stewards, by definition, a middle manager who actually manages a property or object that actually belong to someone else, our master. When our mindset actually rests upon that, how we actually use these properties and these finances actually become quite clear. It is according to his will. So I suggest everyone who actually comes to class always that, you know, let us always start from what is important. And what is important is that where do we actually put God in this whole picture? And when he is truly the Lord of our lives, and not just a small section, not compartmentalized section, but Lord of our whole life, our thoughts on finance actually becomes quite clear according to that. So I encourage everyone to actually get a bud. Yes, I did approve that joke. But be in the community. And you guys got great community there to actually lean on, and also to lead some of them. And, you know, with the help of Holy Spirit and also help of the church, you guys can get through anything. So.
All right. Are there any questions before we close? I know that was a lot. All good?
I miss your classes. When you were in New York, both of you gave great classes.
Thanks, Tia.
So I wasn't going to sign up for this, but then when somebody in the home group last night pointed out that you two were leading it, I thought, oh, okay, then I'm signing up.
We love your support.
Deanna, you have to convince him to move back. That's what
Yeah, we miss you. We miss you guys.
Yeah, we miss you guys so much too. All right, Drew. That's all I had.
Yeah, why don't we open it up for questions? Guys, if anyone wants to go ahead and ask a question, you can unmute or you can drop it in the chat box. So obviously, if you need to log off, you can do that. We'll have this recording. In addition to that, I'm just dropping a link in the chat box for Financial Peace. This is a class. It's going to be a 10-week class, I believe, that Barnaby Lowe is going to be leading. And it's a real deep dive into a lot of these principles. And it actually has and it requires you all as participants in this course to actually do the work of budgeting and all that good stuff. So that class was mentioned at different moments here. And so you can go ahead and register at that link there. And yeah, so any questions, feel free to unmute and ask the question or drop it in the chat box.
Lisa, do you teach other classes beyond this?
Not yet, but you should, yeah, like.
Gabrielle, are you talking about like on finances, or are you talking about just in general?
On finances.
Dating tips.
Next level on finances. Next level.
No, but if you email me, we can chat. Drew only gave me this slot.
We've chatted before. I just wanted to know if you. Okay. It's so good to see your smile.
It's so good to see you too.
You had given a similar talk at a women's conference for Hope, but you've added some things in this one and clarified some things. It evolved somewhat from your previous talk. So I'm glad that I did sit in on it, for sure.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah. Well, you can thank Drew for that, because when David and I spoke with him a day or two ago, he reminded me like, oh yeah, you did this for the women's conference. I was like, oh my gosh, I have notes from the women's conference. I forgot. But yes. But yeah, there's a lot of, I think, more relevant for today's time that, we wanted to make sure that we shared.
Good. Now, Pastor Drew, you said this was recorded, so it will be available on the website, so I can direct other people to watch it.
Absolutely, we'll make sure that it's posted. So, yep, Alex, did you have a question?
I did. Yeah, thanks. My name is Alex. I used to be a financial counselor for Trinity Grace a while back. So one of the things that we were trained on, so when clients had multiple, like that one slide you showed where they had multiple forms of debt and different interest rates. I forget what curriculum we were taught, but that curriculum recommended that we advise someone to pay down one of the smaller debts first as a moral victory, even though it was a different interest rate. So that didn't make sense in my head at that time. And I kind of follow that advice depending on who I was talking to, who my clients were in the future. But what is your take on that?
Yeah, so I think there's multiple ways of attacking debt and multi forms of debt. So, there are people that take it highest balance for, it depends on that person, how that person gets motivated. So the smaller balance strategy is clearly one that is, an easier one to get to because of that moral victory that you're talking about. But from a economic goal standpoint, and if the purpose is to get it done faster, doing it with interest rate is also just as valid. So I think if you present both, but leave the option for the borrower, I think those are valid. The third is doing it by the highest balance, frankly. And so I think those are all viable.
Yeah, Alex, that curriculum actually is FPU, and I'm sure Barnaby actually can chime in on this as he's actually teaching the curriculum this coming up term. But there's a very specific reason why FPU suggests that we actually attack the lowest balance first, is to actually gain the momentum. So most of the cases that when you actually accrue a multiple debt form in multiple category to the multiple institution is because of your oh yeah, hey, Barnaby. So it is because of your behavioral, like you're in the need of a behavioral modification as well as your paradigm shift. And for them to actually just keep at repaying the debt in a long period of time, it will require a sustaining force that drives from the emotional, victory that you actually get. And to actually create that encouragement, David Ramsey actually suggests that people actually attack the smallest debt amount to actually see that category actually be wiped away and then claim their moral victory and then use that momentum to actually attack the debt, even at higher pace, hence, creating the snowball effect. Now that, is specifically for that community where you actually need to put a lot of emphasis on attacking that debt and then creating that environment where you get a lot of moral support from your recovery of your finances. But also at the same time, the way that Lisa actually presented it is to actually shorten the amount by attacking the lowest, the highest, interest rate on it. So it's a two different way of approaching it, but in a community where you can actually get a moral support and just creating that environment. Dave Ramsey actually has really good track record. So I think both way actually is valid. Personally, I prefer Dave Ramsey's way, but also financially, I do understand the way that Lisa actually presented. So I tend to actually go both ways.
Thanks. And do you still recommend the 10% to go to savings if the person has like a pretty significant amount of debt?
That's a great question. So my view is to reduce that level of savings to attack that debt, because if you think about it this way, the savings rate of even the highest today, it's like 1.5%. A couple months ago, it was probably 2%. But that debt, and you saw those schedules, you're never finding 2% debt. That debt is always going to be more expensive than savings. So in some ways, you're paying down something that's more expensive than putting it into something that is not going to get you the same return. So that's how that's my perspective on that.
So if someone does have a significant amount of debt, I have counseled in the past to get to that $1,000 goal.
Yeah.
Other things like you have to anticipate like Christmas time so you can buy gifts and that kind of thing. So if the person has really a lot of debt, what percentage, if any, would you recommend to go towards savings?
Yeah, I like what you just said, right? So again, if I go back to the emergency, having some sort of basic savings discipline, I think is super important. You shouldn't be caught with your pants down, right, when something drastic happens, because then what you'll end up doing is actually going into more debt, which you'll have to pay back later. So having parallel tracks of so whatever that percentage is, that equates to a couple of things. First is that first $1,000 emergency threshold. But then the second piece is getting to a place where you can get to a buffer of, that 3 to 6 month living expense. I would say at that point, you want to prioritize paying down your debt. So you're going to be probably doing parallel streams for a short period of time, but then focusing on debt after you get to that threshold of the 3 to 6 month living expense.
Yeah.
Does that help?
Thank you.
Yes. Say, Lisa.
Lisa?
Yes.
Yeah, may I say something? Just a couple of observations. I agree with your approach. It'd be more, it'd be better to pay the smaller debt because we are emotionally feel we are making a contribution, even though rationally we probably save more money if we attacked the highest interest rate. But the other thing I want to mention is that because you already have credit cards and you have debt, you want to make your current purchases cash for 2 reasons. Number one, the moment you make a purchase, you begin to pay interest on that existing credit card if you already have a debt.
Yes.
Secondly, I think by paying with credit card, it sort of desensitizes you to spending money, as opposed to leaving $40 leave your wallet in real money. I was reading that in Finland, with the money becoming more digital, people have a higher level of debt. And now they are concerned about that. So that's something that I think is important, to pay cash if you can, because otherwise you don't feel your money leaving your pocket.
Yeah, and I think for people like me who don't carry cash, the equivalent of that is actually swiping with your debit card, right? Because there again, you're spending money that you already have in your bank account versus money that you have to pay later, and you may end up not paying the full amount. So Ricardo, I agree with you. And actually, a lot of people, when they first start off into trying to build that net savings position, do exactly what you say. Start with using your debit card, so that you're not, and I know I love points. I love credit card points, but it's not worth it if you're not being able to pay off your credit card in full. So I agree with your point there.
Yeah.
But another point that I tell people who struggle with this is that if you don't foresee that you're going to be able to pay off that that's expense on your credit card when the bill comes in and is due, then you should avoid buying that right now. Hold off until next month.
Yep.
No, don't buy it now. It'll go on sale again later.
Yeah. Yeah. David and I have this practice where I put things in the shopping cart, and if it, for whatever reason, goes out of stock, it wasn't meant to be.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I always check the label on the shelf tags to see how long is it on sale. And if it's going to be on sale for a whole month and it's not likely to go out of stock, then I can wait until another week to buy it when I know I'll have more cash available. But if it's something that I think it will go out of stock, then I may go ahead and take advantage of the sale now, but then
Yep.
cut out other items that could wait till next month.
That makes a lot of sense.
And a lot of these great questions that you guys have, there are great resources and also detailed help in Financial Peace University class. And it seems like some of you guys actually have experience with, FPU. If you do, just get involved, be in the group that actually offer and teach. I mean, I know that Barnaby is leading it. He's great at it, know it firsthand. So I highly recommend that people who actually haven't taken it to take it, people who have taken it to actually, recommend to people around you. And if you actually know of Financial Peace University, please get involved and then, be in the community, be that the leader actually that supports so that we all can actually enjoy the financial peace and financial stewardship.
Great job.
Guys, I had a question. I just dropped it in the chat box. How would you guys advise cutting costs in the midst of this pandemic? Like what areas? How would you approach it first? I know we've talked about these broad categories and budgeting, but like even for you guys, as you mentioned, your March budget and stuff.
Yeah.
Did you guys have a set like, hey, this is where the fluff is, where we can start, How did you guys?
Oh yeah, big time.
Yeah. So how did you guys go about that?
First is being very honest with ourselves and our spending behavior. Like I will be very honest. It was, we did things more out of convenience instead of actually doing things based off of being intentional. And food was the biggest area by far. Before COVID, we were, I was lazy. Like after work, I'm like, I don't want to cook. I'm just going to go here to the local deli or the local restaurant, pick stuff up. Easily became a $50 dinner. And it wasn't a intentional, like, wait, we should not be paying $50 for pad thai, And so it was really thinking about, being more intentional with does it really make sense for us to be spending this much money on food? Yes, we need to eat, but can we do this in a much smarter way? And I will tell you, since the pandemic, we've only ordered out 3 times, which is crazy. Like, we used to order at least 3 times a week. So it's things like that where there's going to be excess. And I don't want you to feel like, well, I have to cut every single thing that brings you joy out of your life. Because actually cooking now brings a lot of joy that I never had experienced before. But it is about, like, do we really need to spend, looking at averages of things that you spend on a monthly basis, and it's like, does that make sense? And cutting back down. Our food budget, we literally cut it probably in half. David, would you say that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And also the reason why we highly stress budgeting is because once you actually know your spending habit, you can actually be honestly figure out, like Drew, as you said, where the fluff is. For us, because during the pandemic, obviously there are some expenses that actually will get reduced so that we actually see a bigger margin. But that won't fit everyone's budget. Some people actually have different spending habits. Some people actually will have different earning potentials. So all of that, you actually have to do the budget first to really honestly see how your financial situation is, and then make a right decision afterwards, whether to actually put more emphasis on saving on food and then cooking more at home, or whether to actually let go of some of the luxury items. But setting up the budget is, I love how Drew, you actually always use the trellis analogies and then the anchor analogies, is creating that boundary within which you can actually find the freedom to move along. And in this, time, I think that you will be able to find that freedom even in this situation once you actually have a good boundary set by setting up the budget and then really having the honest conversation with yourself as well as your accountability partner.
Yeah. So the categories where we saw the biggest excess were food, Amazon, to be completely frank, and gas. So, the New York equivalent could be like Ubers. When we were in New York, we were Ubering a ton. And the question would be like, do we really need to do that? Or can we take public transportation? Can we walk? So it's being, disciplined, but again, it's the why. Like, if you're doing it to be frugal, that's different from, having the intention to save for your future, or, paying down debt, or investing in the future. So I would just leave you with that.
Lisa, just an observation. I hear that the number of bikes being sold has increased.
I heard.
Yeah, and the number of rides by City Bike has also increased because of the distances and independence.
Yeah.
So that's another way to save money.
That's right. I'm gonna get David an electric bike instead of a car.
That's great. All right. Does anyone have any other questions here? Thanks for staying on so long, everyone. I know that after a long week, this is a lot of information, but I just really want to thank David and Lisa for their investment and their willingness to teach this course, or this one-night seminar, I should say.
Thank you, guys.
Well, here's what we'll do. Let me, unless there's any questions, going once, oh, Alex, do you have a question or? No. Okay.
Can I ask it? Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead, Helen. Yep.
Okay, hi. I'm actually going to go off topic a little bit, I think. But Lisa, you mentioned how there were aha moments in your sitting down with David and discussing budgeting. And I would imagine, how you would both have learned from each other. And then I would imagine married couples, would, just learn from each other while managing finances. But based on what you have learned as a married couple, what are your recommendations to singles or couples in courtship when it comes to what to look for in compatibility when it comes to managing finances, or on the flip side, what would be red flags to be looking out for? I hope that makes sense, but
It does. You know what I typically do with hard questions? I punt them to my husband.
And usually when I get a hard question, I punt them to Drew with a shameless plug in that if it is, if you are in a situation of courting, there's a great class that he offers. Don't fall for jerk or cat.
How to
So,
avoid marrying a jerk.
so I highly recommend it. When it comes to finances, we are very fortunate because we are, my best friend is my wife, and we actually get to openly discuss our finances together. But one thing that I actually did look for, even during the courtship, was the fact that we could be financially, very transparent with one another, and this willingness to actually open up and share is very crucial. Now, this is like, this actually conversation was taking place after we were very deep in our relationship. We were actually approaching with a mindset of, like a marriage. So it was within the trusted relationship that we were able to discuss this. If you're single, and many times people who actually take FPU classes actually come to us and ask us, like, how do we actually find our accountability group? You know what, actually, like, find out who actually can actually walk with you faithfully within your faith community is where I send them first. And also ask them to actually talk to your spiritual leader or your community leader, or talk to your pastors and get some recommendations on the person's character. And, a lot of times the budgeting is not a rocket science. It really does not involve, master's degree in business like Lisa. Even I, who actually went to lowly seminary, actually can't understand some of these numbers. So it's not the rocket science, but it is actually built up, based upon trust. So having the person's character and having the relationship first and foremost is important. But, all things aside, in this stewardship of our faith and our lives, it is really important also, not just for financial stewardship, but for anything, to actually have the community and have the covering around you. So Helen, I highly suggest to talk to your, community group, your small group leader, people that you actually pray with and share with time with, and talk to Drew. Maybe you can actually make some suggestion if you are actually in a situation where you're looking for an accountability person.
So Helen, here's what I would say. So again, when I go back to and I was single for a very long time. And I did these exercises with my girlfriends, again, like every February, because we wanted to give ourselves the grace of 28 days. Get girlfriends. Like, think about, even when I wanted to go and train for a half marathon, not a marathon. That's crazy, people. But like a race. I could never do it just by myself. I needed people to race or to train with me. And so think about your social groups and people who you think could have that same motivation, and it will require, as David said, a level of trust, that this is not something that people are just, whimsically gonna try, but they're actually gonna be serious about doing together. And make it fun, make it like a book club or like a wine club, but it's actually coming together and talking about finances. And then when you think about it in the context of, courtship and marriage, David's absolutely right. Like, the red flag is the not willingness to be transparent, or there's actually a lot more other principles that I would say, but that would be the first, is just being able to have a very transparent conversation about finances and being comfortable around it with one another. I think is the first foundational step towards that. But there's actually plenty more that I don't think we have enough time to go over, but I would just say that as being like the first step. Hope that helps.
Cool, thank you.
Yeah, and Helen, I would just recommend too, like Financial Peace University as a course. Every premarital couple, we actually recommend for them to take Financial Peace University. And now we kind of get a little bit overboard with some of our premarital couples. We say, take Emotional Healthy Spirituality, which is an 8-week course, take Emotional Healthy Relationships, which is an 8-week course, and then take Financial Peace University, which is a 9-week course. But I mean, money is one of those issues. I believe 50% of divorces are due to money. So it becomes such a stressor in a relationship, to just kind of get expectations on the table as you're in a relationship with someone is really important. Obviously, you know, there's kind of levels to grade into, you know, when you start having that conversation about money. It's not like on the first date, like, hey, can I see your budget? But yeah, but more so again, to just, as you make your way in and as the commitment level becomes higher and higher, I think that's when that conversation becomes important. So great. Any final questions here, guys? We're approaching our time that we said we would close at 9. Looks like Deanna and Ricardo are debating who's gonna.
Yeah, just one small thing. Another way, and I'm saying this because we are approaching the end of our cable contract, and as you know, when it ends, they raise the price by whatever, $20-$40.
Yep.
A lot of people are deciding maybe we should have just certain apps and the internet, and that should be, you know, sufficient. But that's another way to perhaps lower your monthly budget a little bit.
Absolutely.
And the other one has nothing to do with budget is, and I say this especially for young people, save in a Roth IRA or in a Roth 401k, because not only your employer contributes, but also you have to think about long term. There will be a point where maybe Social Security is not as generous as today.
And no pensions.
And no pensions. So that's some food for thought.
Yeah, very important. What my late mother told me when I first started working was every time I got a raise, that was money that was put towards savings, as if I never got a raise.
Mm-hmm.
I learned to live on a particular, you know, income, and whatever increase I got each year, it was as if I didn't get an increase. So that, you know, we would have something for our retirement.
Very wise woman.
Yes, she was.
Fantastic.
I didn't listen to her at first, but eventually I did.
Well, hey guys, thanks for joining us tonight. Let me close this in prayer, and then David and Lisa, I'm guessing some people might want to still chat with you if you guys are up for it. But I know we've kept your time for a long time, and I just again wanted to thank you guys. So let me pray for us to close our time, and yeah.